Welcome back. My next guest is Dr. Bongo Adi. He's a senior faculty at the Lagos Business School. We're still talking about Nigeria's 2017 budget proposal and taking a look at some of the key objectives that this budget hopes to achieve. Good morning to you, Dr. Adi. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much.
So, what do you make of the 2017 budget just presented? I know there's been, a lot of perspectives given, but what do you make of it?
Well, in terms of the objective of the budget to reflect the economy, what I can say to that, I think in nominal terms, it's about 13% or 14% increase over last year's budget. But in dollar terms, it's actually about 22% contraction, because when we look at the exchange rate prevailing, last year was 197. And this year we're talking of 305. So if you look at the exchange rate, then that brings it to a contraction of about 22%. So are we better off or not? So I don't know. So
why don't you answer that? Do you think that are you convinced that this budget is actually a budget of recovery and growth?
Okay, let's start from last year. How much of the last budget was implemented? So if we read the president's speech, so he acknowledged that there was a lot of drawbacks to implementation of that budget. The reason why the Senate President is suggesting that we move the extend the implementation period to May 2017.
Was the House of Representatives speaker?
Yes, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Speaker of the Senate. I think I listened to him just a moment ago.
Okay.
Anyway, be that as it may, so what it means is that right now the budget is at below 50% implementation. So what have we achieved? So I think that's a rhetorical question.
753.6 billion naira has been released for capital expenditure, yes, at least as of October 2016. And taking a look at the 2017 budget, we see that Power Works and Housing actually has the largest share of 529 billion naira for 2017. Now, as at October 2013, about 350 billion naira has only been allocated to capital expenditure. What does this say for the federal government's drive to improve infrastructure?
Yeah, in addition to that, we have to look at the lag, the transmission lag that normally occurs between when the budget money is released, when fund is released, to when contractors get access to funds and then mobilize to sites. So when we put all this together, so you can see that we're still, significantly back when it comes to implementation of that budget. But if everything goes well and the funds makes their way to contractors and they're able to deploy to sites, of course we'll begin to observe significant improvement in certain sectors. Now, the capital expenditure, while it is good to reflect the economy, because of the so-called multiplier effect that it's supposed to have, and the president also highlighted on that. But until the money gets to contractors and they mobilize people and then create the necessary employment, then we can't see much happening in the economy.
But of course, you're getting good vibes already from the president. He says that they will try to clear the backlog of contractual obligations, which is estimated at about 2 trillion naira.
Yes, the budget on face value, when we read it, it sounds good. Okay, that's a good statement of budget intent. But I think we have to look at the meat of the matter, which is we peel off the veneer and then look at the reality on ground. The problem we have is that we're running a deficit budget, which is not bad in itself. Okay, we look at 7.3 trillion expenditure budgeted, and then that is to be funded by with about 4.4 trillion revenue, so giving a gap of almost 3 trillion. So out of that, infrastructure spending is about 30.7%. But we have to look at the misalignment, which the president also referred to, between the monetary, fiscal, and trade policies, especially the monetary policy. As we speak right now, the Treasury bill, the government bond, which is usually the so-called risk-free rate, is at about 17%, which is quite high. So a typical investor who wants to access funds from the banking, the financial sector, we have to contend with this, because banks will not lend you at anything less than this. So you have to factor in their cost of funding and every other thing, and then at the end of the day, the cost of borrowing will really go very high. So that is not very healthy for.
So to encourage, because we're looking at improving infrastructure, and like you rightly mentioned, it always has a roll-on effect. So power, has an effect on transport. It also has an effect on works. It also has an effect on housing. Everything just ties into each other. So do you think that for now, maybe the Central Bank of Nigeria should be looking at coming out with probably another program, an initiative to encourage contractors who, for instance, will be wanting to access finance. So instead of going to the bond market, to the debt markets to try to raise funds, you can't go to, any of this we have the development bank coming on stream in January 2017. So maybe that should also be an avenue. Contractors go and access funds from there at relatively affordable rates.
I think this has been on a hot topic for quite some years now, the issue of government's role in infrastructure. We've been talking about public-private partnership, but from the look of things, it looks like we are just paying lip service to that. So rather than talking about contractors, I would have expected to hear the president talk about PPPs as a better way to provide infrastructure.
Well, he talked about partnering very strongly with the private sector.
Yeah, that's what we want to see, because when you say that you're paying contractors, backlog of contractors, that's telling us that government is still into direct procurement for all those services, those infrastructure services. So we want to see a situation where more of such infrastructure is auctioned via PPPs. Let the private sector, those who have the fund, and can provide the infrastructure, and then they're better able to manage the risks, get in there and do the job, and then get paid from the service fees that they derive from the projects.
So getting more hands-on with the private sector, particularly for the railways. He talked about the railways, yes. And we're seeing transportation getting about 260 billion.
I was happy to hear the thing he said about the railways. Okay, that it took a long period of negotiation with the various partners. I guess the railways are going to be procured via PPPs. So I like what he said about that. It took a long time, but from January, we're going to see some action in that space.
What exactly are you hoping to see?
Well, let the contractors, the various partners mobilize to sites and start putting the rail gauges on the ground.
Most of them would say that that's not really the issue for them. It's not about getting the equipment, but it's about understanding how exactly the federal government wants to work with the private sector. How do you want to work with these contractors in such a way that you don't have somebody shortchanged at the end of the day?
But that should have been part of the negotiation they've been into for over a year now. So I think those should have been taken care of. But regardless of how the government wants to relate, those things can all be handled simultaneously. But I think that it is important that contractors mobilize to site, because the infrastructural deficit, the constraint that businesses are going through in Nigeria need to be alleviated if we're going to have any hope of coming out of the recession we're into right now.
Listening to constant conversation, interfacing with people who come through Lagos Business School every day, what is the general view with regards how the state of infrastructure is in Nigeria? It's
very poor. There's no two ways about that. When you think about logistics, it's a nightmare everywhere. And then businesses have been crying this year. It's been very, very bad. And that is why I'm afraid that we may not be able to come out of the recession in 2017, because businesses have a palpable sense of pessimism, not optimism. And if you look at the key indicators like the Purchasing Managers Index, it's been at an all-time, showing pessimistic levels. So that tells you that things are not really working out, especially when it comes to infrastructure. Power has been an albatross, and it continued to be. So people felt that by now there would have been some kind of improvement in that sector, but we've not been able to witness that.
But then you see there's been constant engagement with the distribution companies, the generating companies, Transmission Company of Nigeria, and the regulators, as well as the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing in this regard. And don't you think that these efforts at least should be given time to crystallize?
Of course, time is of the essence here. Time, yes, they need time, but at the same time, people are crying, people are losing jobs, manufacturing factories are closing up, Every day we hear I think that is top on the news. Companies moving production bases out of Nigeria, and then workers being laid off. That is a reality on ground. Of course, people are patient. We want to see action. We want to see change. We want to see things improve. But until it happens, everybody will still be expecting for things to happen.
Dr. Adi, we still have a couple of days to end in 2016, and we still have the 2016 budget running up until May 5. So 2017 budget will not begin to be implemented until after May 2016 or May 2017. I beg your pardon. So for you, what's your expectation at the end of the day? Because we're still going to have to talk about what this 2017 budget really will be achieving again in the coming days. But as we roll into 2017,
I think the budget presentation by the president seemed to have struck the right chords, especially in the joint venture cash calls that the federal government is pulling out of and finding alternative funding mechanism. I think that is actually a step in the right direction. And then he also mentioned that they had been in discussion with some of the power companies in Nigeria, to address some of their concerns, especially cash-strapped concerns. So these are the things everybody wants to see happen. Like I said, there's usually a transmission lag between policies and implementation. So I think by May 2017, we will begin to see whether the budget is fully implemented. Even if we get 60-70% implementation, that would be good. But what I don't really like about the budget is that 2 years down the line, this is the second budget coming from this president, yes, and then he's still harking back to the past. Everybody knows the story of the past. We don't want to be hearing about the past anymore. We start from reality on ground and move from there.
Dr. Bongo Adi, a senior faculty with the Lagos Business School, thank you so much for joining me on the program this morning and, of course, sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much.